From an assortment of highly secure, top-secret locations throughout South Texas, this is the increasingly popular Spurs Insider Podcast. I am Mike Finger, back with sports editor Nick Talbot and beat writers Tom, Ringo Starr, Orsborn, and Jeff McDonald. And guys, this team might not be totally predictable, but it's winning about as much as it's losing, and I guess that's as much as any of us can hope these days, right?
Well, first of all, you say this podcast is increasingly popular, but we got bumped today from our normal recording spot, so we can't be that. We normally record at 11, and now we have to do it at 10. So we can't be that popular. We got bumped.
Well, first of all, I don't know if you know how podcasts work, but the listeners have no concept or really interest in what time we're recording.
If we're so popular, we should be able to run this joint and podcast whenever we want it and record whenever we want it. And I don't care who's coming in to take our spot; they have to wait on us.
He's making a joking reference to the fact that the Puro Politics podcast, which is also produced by the Express News and does fine work, and I realize that what we do is very important, and what they do does not quite have the same import in this world. But they do good work too, and they have elected officials coming in, and the least we can do is to kind of adjust to the schedule of people who might not be making the same impact in the world as us making jokes about the Spurs. But we can at least, in the spirit of cooperation.
I mean, I believe they had Representative Castro. They had Representative Castro in this morning, and what does that guy have to talk about?
I know.
We just have to get our own elected official to come in.
That's right.
Maybe Castro can come on here and talk about the Spurs next week.
Again, just because we talk about stuff that's way more important in the world does not mean we can't exhibit a sense of unity and cooperation with all of our coworkers. I think that's the best we can do in this situation. And
there is one elected official looking for a way to communicate these days.
There's a bunch of them.
Boy, when I talked about the increasingly popular podcast that we're doing, we might be getting in trouble. Anyway, the San Antonio Spurs basketball team.
Oh yeah, those guys. Because that's what we're here to talk about.
Our local Cagers are 5-5 after 10 games. Did not exactly get there in the way that everyone might have predicted, especially on this road trip, where I think last week on the podcast, we mentioned that it was going to start out really rough, but if they could end up with maybe 2 wins out of the 5, they'd be doing okay. And they won the first 3 right away. And what did Greg Popovich say yesterday? Kind of ran out of gas and hit a wall on Sunday in the second game of a back-to-back at Minnesota. But 5-5 after 10 games with that schedule, not a bad spot to be.
Yeah, I'm done trying to predict how this is going to go, because it seems like every week we come in here and sort of try to project, and I'm wrong every single time. I've been all over them. I've been they're the worst team in the league. Oh, they're 2-0. Maybe they're not the worst team in the league. Oh, they suck again, and now they're kind of back in it. And I think we said, look, last week, looking at the 5-game trip ahead, if they can just win 2 of those, we're going to call that a successful trip. And then they started 3-0, and they're 3-1 going into the final game against the Thunders. So you already have to say it's been a pretty successful trip for them. And you're right, in a way we didn't necessarily see it coming. I remember sitting here last week saying, they're clearly not going to win either of the games at Staples the way they're playing. So they have to make good work of the last 3 games on the trip. And darned if they did, dadgummed if they didn't go into Staples and win both of them suckers. Like nobody does. That they're the first team to go into Staples and beat the Clippers and the Lakers in consecutive games since Kawhi and LeBron were both in LA. So that's not something people do. Spurs went and done it. And won the first game in Minnesota, and then somehow ran out of gas and hit a wall. It seems like if you run out of gas, you wouldn't hit the wall. You would maybe they just rolled gently into the wall after running out of gas. I don't know how that works.
That's probably accurate. Yeah. And to cut them some slack, they had a little, even though it's the back-to-back or it's the second game against a team that it was on a 6 or 7 game losing streak in Minnesota, one of the lesser teams in the Western Conference. There was some stuff working against the Spurs on Sunday, and that they lost their best player, who I guess either Tom or Jeff can provide an update on DeMar DeRozan. But that was a tough spot to be in for them, playing the same team on the second night in a row without their best player.
And to be fair, Minnesota did not have their best player either in Karl Anthony Towns. But by the end of that game, that second game in Minnesota, not only are you down DeRozan, obviously Derek White's not there. Drew Eubanks is in COVID protocol. Lonnie Walker's got cramps and can't go back into the game in the fourth quarter. Devin Vassell has banged knees and can't go back into the game in the fourth quarter. There were no buttons left to push for Pop for a team running out of gas. And you kind of saw they went from 9 up with 9 minutes to go to losing that game because of it. The update on DeRozan is, what was that, Saturday night, got word he needed to get back to Los Angeles post haste to kind of visit and be with his ailing father. Left Sunday morning, so was not available for that game. And then, due to the pandemic situation, it's not quite as simple as whenever he decides he's ready to come back and rejoin the team, he can just show up. There's some additional hoops and medical red tape he's got to cut through before he can get there. So we don't really know when he's going to get back, but it's going to be longer than it would be if there was not a pandemic raging.
And he's trying to mitigate that by submitting to daily testing while he's gone, right? Yeah,
that's one of the sort of protocols that the league has instituted. Like, if you can show us negative test every day that you're gone, it'll be easier for us to let it. Well, what will happen is when he's ready to come back, the Spurs doctors and the league doctors will confer, go over his case, weigh all kinds of stuff, including, his testing and where he's been and what he's done and who he's been around and has he been in contact with anybody who had all that stuff. And they'll kind of decide the way forward. Does he need to quarantine? If so, for how long? And that sort of thing. It's talking with the people at the league yesterday. It's really hard to say to give a window. How long will it take? Because you really don't know until you get into the nitty gritty of his case and what has occurred since he's been away from the team.
Well, obviously, you hope for the best for him and for his.
Like if he's hanging out with his buddy James Harden, this is going to be a problem.
Right.
He's going to take him a while to get back.
Obviously, we all hope the best for him and his family, and for him to take care of stuff there. And this kind of pales in comparison to real life, but it's got kind of frustrating for the Spurs and for DeMar, because he played just a brilliant game that last night there, and had been playing well to start the season. What had been going well for the Spurs and for DeMar in specific over the past week or so, Tom?
He was closing games like they had been accustomed to him doing. That closer role, something he really relishes. He was doing it rather well, especially in that 38-point game. Interestingly, now they have 4 members of their team, not all players, in Los Angeles. Eubanks, as Jeff mentioned, Becky Hammond, and an unnamed staffer are quarantining, going through the COVID health and safety protocols, which can last up to 14 days. And Drew, Becky, and the staffer are in Los Angeles. And Los Angeles is going through a really tough time with COVID. So it's just interesting. You've got all of them there. And we don't know yet if Drew and Becky and the staffer tested positive for legal reasons. The Spurs can't disclose that, but they are going through the protocols, and they missed Becky. DeMar, before he left, addressed that. Patty Mills, and Pop said last night she continues to fulfill a lot of her coaching duties from out there, scouting reports, I would think, and game plan input, probably virtual meetings with the staff, but they miss her presence a lot.
If they're in LA for those 2 full weeks, they're going to get sick of takeout from Tom's Urban at LA Live, I think.
Not everyone experiences Los Angeles the same way that you do on your many road trips there. That's all I'll say. But
not just me, but the whole team. They stay down at LA Live and never leave.
But the point that Tom was making about missing Becky, I think that applies to just about any staffer. That's not to minimize Becky, but there was a really interesting story on ESPN.com last week about how overwhelmed team medical staffs, training personnel have been during this whole thing, just because they're constantly having to adhere to protocols, and it's just a 24/7 drain on all the stuff they have to go through, how difficult it has been for everybody. And I would assume that losing Becky, losing any unnamed staffer, just complicates that and makes it all the more difficult for everyone to kind of navigate this whole season that's been unlike any other. I get looking ahead at the schedule. There's at least no back-to-backs for a while. When you look at how they are going to deal with no DeMar DeRozan, no Derek White, no Becky Hammond for a little bit, but there's no great time to be without a bunch of people like that.
That's true, but other teams have had it worse. Clearly, I mean,
Yep.
You got teams having to play with 8 players, 7 players. So the Spurs, in a way, have been lucky so far.
Right.
But it seems like it's going to get worse or more dicey before it gets better and less dicey.
Yeah, we had our first home games there too. So
Yeah.
It's got to be demoralizing, I would think, as Pop mentioned last night. They're doing everything they can, and the Spurs have really adhered to the health and safety guidelines, the 100-page manual. They've taken it very seriously for obvious reasons because of Pop's age, and even without that, they would take it seriously. But Pop's age certainly enters into the equation. But they're doing everything they can, and still, things are happening.
And that said, this is what the NBA signed up for. It's what just like MLB, just like the NFL. I mean, they knew there were going to be some positive tests. They knew there might be some outbreaks within individual teams. They knew there might have to be some games postponed. That's why they released the schedule in the way that they did. So I think once you've decided we're going to give this a go outside the bubble, you're just signing up to accept some level of this stuff. So I think maybe while fans are freaking out and saying shut it down, the league's not even close to that point yet. They're kind of right where they thought they would be, to be honest. I don't think this is surprising to Adam Silver or anyone at the league office. And we can argue whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it's not surprising, and it's what was expected when you're going to do this without a bubble.
And to address that part of it, that the question that's been out there from some people over the past week especially is, well, why didn't they go back to the bubble? That was never an option.
Ever.
It was hard enough to get everybody to stay there for the first 3 months, and they were never going to do it for a whole season. They were never going to do it for another month. It just was not feasible for anybody. And if they were going to do this, they were going to do this at home arenas. And like Jeff said, the fact that 2 games have been scuttled so far, that's probably what would have been expected that probably is one of the better case scenarios that people would have expected after the first.
I was going to say, if you really had talked to the people at the league office and got their real thoughts, I think they've been lucky so far to just be 2.
Right. It will be
football so far in terms of like postponed games. College football was a mess all season.
Right. And there will be complications if an entire team has to, shut down for a week, because it's not just one game. It could be 3 or 4. If a team drops below the 8 minimum guys that they need, one already sort of did. The Sixers the other day, I believe it was on Saturday, suited up the minimum 8 players, but Doc Rivers said there was no way he was going to play the 8th guy. Was it Mike Scott, who just wasn't ready to play yet? And so they basically played with 7 guys for an entire game. And if it ever drops below that, there could be some scheduling complications, and then maybe you get 1 or 2 teams that can't play for a week. This isn't to say, we're not saying that this is the league is just going to weather through it and all is going to be fine. There's going to be more stuff to deal with, but right now they're kind of where they thought they'd be.
I mean, I don't know if you look at MLB as a positive role model or a negative one, because on the one hand, they had this going on all summer where games are canceled, series are canceled.
Yep.
They're having to scramble, but they got through the season and they, and finished the season, crowned a champion. But there's a dude on the field with COVID in game 6 of the World Series. So right. I don't know if you look at MLB as a reason to hope or a reason for pessimism that they just sort of got through. But holy crap!
It's probably not. It's just a data point. I mean, it's just another thing to look at how how they weathered it. They probably did not do it as well as they could have. I think another difference, while we're on this subject, one thing the NBA could have done is they could have expanded the rosters before the season started, allowed for more two-way guys, because on a major league team, if you're without a few guys, you can kind of weather it. And they had minor leaguers at alternate sites that they could plug in every now and then. But with some of the Sixers are a good example. You have a maximum of 15 roster spots and two-way guys, 17 players. And once you're down a few, it gets really dicey. So I think that's something that they could have considered to do different.
Aside from teams maybe not wanting to pay the payroll, I don't see the downside of just you don't have to make roster cuts of training camp.
Right.
You can just keep your 20 guys. I don't see the downside of that, except for it's just a little bit higher payroll.
Yeah.
In addition to everyone, so many people going through COVID protocols, there's just a slew of injuries too. So that,
which might be related, because guys haven't been in the gym, haven't been doing the same physical stuff that they're doing in a typical year.
Well, this got dark.
Well, that's, it's what's going on. And here at the Spurs Insider Podcast, which is related to expressnews.com, where you can get all your Spurs information and all your information about the world. That's we talk about what's going on.
I mean, if you want Happy Time podcast, go listen to Puro Politics.
That's true. On the on a happier note, some Spurs have been playing rather well through the past several weeks, including in a losing effort last night, one Lonnie Walker IV, who somebody I saw make an astute observation about how he was playing the role of DeMar DeRozan early in last night's game. And he's just the latest in a long line of younger Spurs who have kind of had their moments so far this season, right?
Yeah, this is kind of a little bit amazing. They've played 10 games, right? Uh-huh. They've had a different leading scorer in 7 of those 10 games, which is tops in the league. Nobody else can boast that many different leading scorers, and Walker was the 7th to join that list. So yeah, they've become a team that can sort of do it in different ways, and it was fun to watch. I will say Lonnie had 22 in the first half and 3 in the second.
Right.
So he also ran out of gas and hit a wall, which maybe is expected. I don't know, but it was fun to watch him operate there in the first half and figure out that he was maybe the most explosive player on the floor and use that to his advantage.
That stat about 7 different leading scorers in 10 games is a funny one, because you think, well, shoot, a lot of teams would love that kind of depth. And then you think, well, maybe a lot of teams would not like to have 7 different guys, you never knowing who you're going to get. There's something comforting about having the same guy, lead most nights, where you can. It's
been interesting though, because it hasn't been like a cheap leading scorer a lot either. It's not like a guy who leads you with 16. You've had a lot of guys with season highs, career highs. DeMar matched his Spurs career high the other night. DeJounte had a 29-point game. Lonnie looked like he was on the way to a career high. That was Lonnie Walker's just second 20-point game of his entire career, so that was interesting to me too. But they haven't had cheap ones. They've had guys just kind of go off.
And towards the end of the Sunday night game against the Timberwolves, the loss, you kind of saw where they're vulnerable. And I guess any team would be vulnerable without its best player. But, I mean, no DeMar DeRozan. Derek White could have been useful in some of those late last-minute possessions where there was that one sequence where they kept drawing up plays. They were down by 5 or 4 with 40, 50 seconds to go. Would get up just a terrible shot, and the Timberwolves would knock it out of bounds, and they'd get a chance for another one and get another terrible shot. This isn't to say that they were poorly designed. It was just there was no legs left for Patty. There was no legs left for LaMarcus, who was playing the second night of a back-to-back after coming back from an injury. It was just kind of a situation where they desperately needed somebody out there to kind of break it down and get a layup or something, and they just couldn't do it. And you think that will improve when you have either DeMar DeRozan or Derek White or Lonnie Walker on the floor at the end.
The contrast between the 2 nights in Minnesota, the down the stretch was, obvious. The one night you've got DeRozan scoring 9 straight points to close the fourth quarter and get you to overtime. Mm-hmm. And the next night he's not available and they can't get a bucket to save their lives.
Right. On the LaMarcus thing, his numbers aren't great, and he hasn't had what anybody would consider a great start to the season. They were at one point 4-1 with him in the lineup. He clearly makes them better.
I believe that second game in Minnesota was the first game they had lost where he played more than 20 minutes. I think since he's come back from his knee injury, he's played pretty well. He's played well.
Yeah. We're recording this the morning after the only loss of the entire week. But what stood out to you guys through the first 3, the 2 big victories in LA and then the OT against the Timberwolves?
Well, Keldon Johnson, we haven't mentioned him yet. Just continues to be, with the exception of last night, he's played so well and. Continuously gives him that energy and, the headlong drives to the basket and, it's kind of wrong to say it's a surprise anymore. Right. He's really been consistent and strong. And Ryan Sanders mentioned last night, just what, he's like that guy for a long time now, dating back to college and, everything about him, the Spurs like. So, the more playing time he gets, the better he's going to be. So, yeah, he stood out to me.
This is venturing into ridiculous hot take territory, and it comes with some caveats. First of all, one's a second-year guy. The other's just getting started without much of a training camp. And the other guy clearly the other guy I'm talking about is this year's number 1 pick, Anthony Edwards of Minnesota. You can watch him play and see what they liked about him. But this is the hot take part. If you ask the Spurs, would you rather move forward with the number 1 pick of the 2020 draft or the number 29 pick of the 2019 draft? I'm not convinced that the Spurs wouldn't take the number 29 pick in the 2019 draft and Keldon Johnson. That dude is going to be, to add to this hot take, that guy's going to be a star.
Here's my hot take.
Okay.
The Spurs totally missed on Keldon Johnson with number 19 in that
the first time.
In that draft.
That's the thing. And that kind of adds to the Manu Ginobili type aura to this, in that people always give the Spurs credit for drafting Manu, which they deserve. They found him, and he's going to be a Hall of Famer. But if they loved him that much, they could have taken him in the first round, So, but yeah, that Keldon's going to be. I just, when you look at, he's built to play right away, and maybe that contributes to how impressive he's been as a young player. Some guys kind of need to grow into their bodies and learn how to be physical and that kind of thing. He's that right away. And we've talked about this on previous podcasts, but he's guarding Pascal Siakam and LeBron James, and I'm forgetting guys that I think he had some Kawhi Leonard time, some Zion Williamson time. He's holding his own against everybody, and he's going to have some off nights like he did Sunday against the Timberwolves. But what a weapon that guy could be, where he can play 4, he can play 3, he can guard a bunch of different positions. And just when he goes to the rim, people can't handle him. He doesn't always finish, but there's something there. And
and there's never been that sense of do I belong? You know, he's just that confidence just oozes out of him.
Exactly.
How did that guy fall to number 29 in that draft? I have one idea. I've heard John Calipari say this. I think about Keldon Johnson is that you go to Kentucky and you're in one of those giant star-studded recruiting classes, and if you're not Anthony Davis or Karl Anthony Towns, you can kind of slip through the cracks there. And you're the third best player at Kentucky that year, but you might be the best pro prospect and people don't see it. And he was the third. Keldon was the third guy from Kentucky that year to go in the first round. And because he wasn't Tyler Hero or PJ Washington, like maybe he didn't get the showcase that he would have if he had been just going to some other school and being the star. So I wonder if that has something to do with how he slipped.
I have a friend named there's a guy named Dustin.
No, you don't. Come on. That's
true. I know a person.
Oh, you sir.
I know a person named Dustin McComas who works in Austin and goes to a lot of the AAU circuit type stuff. He's a big recruiting guy and also happens to be a big Rockets fan. And he'd been watching Keldon Johnson since he was 16, 17 years old. And the night of the draft, Dustin told me, just exasperated. It's like, of all the teams, like how many NBA teams are going to just be annoyed and frustrated that of all the teams to wind up with Keldon Johnson, it's the San Antonio. Of course, the Spurs ended up with him. The guys who've been watching that kid since he was younger knew that he was going to be special. And I think Jeff's right. He kind of got overshadowed at Kentucky. People tend to overthink the draft sometimes. Maybe the Spurs even did when they didn't take him the first time, but when they got him with the number 29 pick, some people saw that as a steal. I think it's working out that way. And it kind of goes
again. They picked him second of the two picks.
Right.
I remember talking to Hero in Washington at the All-Star game last year in Chicago about Keldon, and Keldon was stuck in the G League at the time. Mm-hmm. And here's Hero in Washington playing in the Futures game at All-Star Weekend, and they both were steadfast, in saying that he's going to be, he's going to be something. Just give him time, and he's with a franchise that does things differently, mm-hmm. with sticking guys in the G League. But I just got the sense they weren't just saying that to be nice. They really meant it. That just get him out of the G League and you're going to see what he can do.
Well, and to go back to the chicken and egg debate or discussion we had on the podcast in previous seasons about Keldon Johnson, Lonnie Walker, Derek White, DeJounte Murray. Does their success early in their NBA career mean they shouldn't have been in the G League as long, or does their success early in their NBA career kind of owe to all the confidence they built playing in the G League?
I guess we're finding out a little bit with Vassell now. Sorry to interrupt, Mike.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, just see what Vassell can, what occurs with Devin, being thrust into it early and not having that G League experience and those summer league experiences.
He might not have been a guy taken with was it number 11 pick?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He might not have been a guy that would have gone anyway.
But knowing the Spurs,
he probably would have had a night or two there.
Yeah.
But I do think that it's fair to say two things in that Keldon probably could have been effective as a rookie last year had he just been thrown to the Wolves. But I think it's also fair to think that he's better this year because of the time that he had, all those minutes that he had in Austin. So something to look forward to as they head into the rest of the season. We'll see if he ever hits that wall that some young guys hit when they're having success early in their career. Lonnie Walker, maybe he found something last night. And we'll see if DeMar and Derek come back anytime soon.
Hey, did you tell everyone where to find the newsletter and all that stuff?
I told them about expressnews.com, and I guess
we have a website now.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep. They can find other things. They can find other things besides the Spurs. They can find probably highlights of the Puro Politics interview with Joaquin Castro on there too, if they're so inclined to read about such trivial matters rather than the Spurs. So yeah, go. We're winding down. That's a good way to finish. I know the Spurs. I know the Spurs are the most important thing in your lives, but go ahead and think about other stuff too. There's other stuff going on in the world that you can.
I tried that earlier this week. I didn't care for it. Didn't care for it.
Yeah, it can be up and down. It can be up and down, but we'll be back next week to talk about the Spurs. And until then, everybody should just go out there and take care of each other and keep it real.